Hey everybody, it's Romania Black, and I woke up this morning and thought, you know what would be fun to watch? Monster. So we're on episode 13 of Monster, and man, the last two episodes getting introduced to Dieter have been really fun. I love Dieter's character so much because he's a very realistic kid, but I hate the circumstances that he's involved in. I'm like, Monster, why are we going there? I feel like I'm going to be saying that the entire series. Why are we going there? Because it's just how this show works, right? So I actually have a lot of comments. I've been very hypercritical about what I read, and I'm putting stuff out on Patreon and YouTube about ignoring comments that if my gut feels like something spoilery or is going to be, I'll just ignore it because especially with this series, I feel like it's so easy to be spoiled. And I've had a lot of people comment about Netflix, both on Patreon and YouTube, that it's just come out on Netflix, and I was like, oh man. And I did have some people say that, unfortunately, I have not looked on Netflix at the Monster episodes because of two reasons. One, I don't want to see thumbnails. The great thing about what Anthony has done is that they've given me episodes without thumbnails. It just literally has like black boxes. And two, it does not have episode titles. It just says like Monster 12, Monster 13, Monster 14. There are no episode titles. I love that because that means as a reactor, I can go in, sit down, and not be influenced in any way, shape, or form of knowing what the episode is going to be about. And I don't look at the previews at the end of the episode, so I don't know. So I find that really fun. So I've not been looking on Netflix, but apparently Netflix is being a jerk and only publishing the first 30 episodes. Why you would do that, Netflix, I don't know. Maybe they're gauging to see how much people watch it. But I'm like, that's kind of a dick move. You know, if you're going to put this whole series out there, why not put all of the episodes or do it week by week? Make up your mind, Netflix. But I will say one thing I don't want to know, and that's in the post. It's going to be on the community post and on YouTube and on the Discord and Patreon, is I don't want to know if there are cliffhangers at certain moments in the series. I'm watching it episode by episode. I'm not going to watch more than one episode a week. I'm sorry. I know this is going to take like a year and a half to get through, but that's just how it's going to be. And so I don't want to know when there's going to be a cliffhanger, because then as a reactor, I go in and I'm like, well, I know it's going to end in a cliffhanger this week, and it spoils some of the surprise, right? So just don't let me know. But somebody had said that episode 30 ends on a cliffhanger, and I'm like, well, that's a while down the road, so maybe I'll forget by then. But I probably won't because I have a pretty good memory. So I'm like, but that sucks. I'm like, Netflix, why would you do that? That's really cruel. So Netflix kind of sucks for doing that, but at least I guess they're putting the first 30 episodes out there, and maybe by the time we get through episode 30, they'll have put the other 44 episodes or another 30 episodes, or however they're planning on doing it. I don't know. I know that series like JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, they posted the last season in like 4 sets of cores, and they're doing that with Bleach right now, which is, I get why they're doing it, especially with Bleach, if they're still animating and they didn't want to wait till they had, 50 episodes animated. They just want to release it in chunks as they went. I get that. With JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, though, I heard it was already done and they just chose to release it in chunks, and that's dumb. Like, do it week to week or do it all at once. Like, make up your mind. But yeah. So going into these episodes, I do have several comments, and they're really good comments. So thank you all for being awesome. Evil Communist Pickle Rick talked about how the Daphne flowers in episode 9 represent immortality. And I thought that was very interesting. And then Lunge, bringing up historical facts with Hugo was maybe to point out the fact and hint that he is French and living in Germany after he was in Myanmar. And I was like, okay. So that's interesting, because it's like Lunge's trying to like pick at Hugo for information and trying to point out that he's kind of a foreigner living here, so maybe he's at a disadvantage anyway. It's curious. Lunge's strategy of trying to pick at information is fascinating. We've not seen him in a while. I miss Lunge. I don't want to know when we'll see him again, but I am excited when we do. Sunray pointed out, and several actually did, and I'm glad you guys mentioned this because I have rethought about it since the reaction, that Hugo telling Tenma, we'll get to this, that the idea of the girl being saved by Hugo was actually relating to the bird being taken from the nest. I associated it with Hugo saving her and increasing her chances of survival, but several of you have commented that it's actually that Hugo taking her away from her home makes it a very rare case that she would survive. And we'll talk about that again in a minute. But Sunray says that Hugo telling Tenma to shoot twice to increase his likelihood of survival is a really neat callback to Johan shooting Junkers twice up on the hospital in the little abandoned building. He didn't need to shoot him twice because Junkers wasn't going to attack him, but he did anyway, increasing the probability of survival for Johan, and also suggesting that Johan has been trained with a gun as well as Tenma. So just going to point that out there. Myanmar, also being an Asian country, might mean, according to Sunray, that the little girl knew how to use chopsticks all along, so it wasn't something she had to acquire skill for. She already knew how to do it. She just wasn't letting on. But also, again, she's pointing out the fact that Hugo taking her away from her home country would increase the likelihood that she wouldn't survive. And that kind of goes with Hannah H. Bananas 7's comment, talking about how the little girl, her silence in that episode is so much more powerful than dialogue. I loved H. Banana's comment that she doesn't say anything in the whole episode, and that's not a bad thing, because I feel like as much trauma as she's gone through, what dialogue could we have her say, right? That would say more than her silence does to Tenma. So I loved that use of silence with her character, because yeah, she's been through so much. We don't need words to describe it. We get it as the audience. But also the fact of Hugo raising her, and at the end of the episode, like Sunray said, being successful is a miracle. And I instantly thought of Attack on Titan, oddly enough. Without spoiling anything, that series deals with a theme that sometimes violence can lead to this, somehow, weirdly enough, violence can lead to this situation where two people can come together and reach an understanding, and that's the miracle of it all. And it's a big theme in Attack on Titan, and they explore it in episode 9, and H. Banana's comment instantly made me think of that, and I was like, aha! So that was a lot of fun. I liked that a lot. I don't know if Isayama has watched Monster. I would imagine he has, because this series is fairly older and came out before Attack on Titan. I would imagine Isayama has watched Monster, because I can see some similar themes taking place. So there is that. Cyphus said that the ED is actually a children's book that you can get in Japan. I don't want it now, but I think when I'm done with the series, it would be cool to get access to that children's book and see it all laid out and see if there's dialogue with it and how the story goes. But obviously that would be a major spoiler, so we're going to wait till the end of the series to get that. But it's good to know it's actually a children's book. Fun times. And then finally, Music Too Loud, Ow, which is a great handle, talked about how that there is a difference. They said that they disagreed about Tenma changing from what he said to Junkers to now, saying that it's not necessarily that Tenma changed, but that he has reevaluated what he said. So there's a difference between erasing and resetting from the past, per Tenma and Junkers' conversation, in that Tenma acknowledges that you can't erase the past, but you can learn from it and move forward. And I thought that was a really good thing to point out, because yeah, after your comment, I was like, that does make sense, that Tenma's like, I've not forgotten my past, but you can move on from it. The thing about that is, it's a very idealistic mindset, because there are a lot of people in society that don't believe that. They believe that if you were bad in the past, you'll be bad in the present, and that you cannot change. So there is the societal mindset that how you are is how you will always be. And I think Tenma is trying to tell Junkers that ideally, no, people do change. And that's so true. Tenma's mindset there is ideal, but it's not wrong. Like, yeah, people can change. People can reform. They can realize the errors of their ways and move forward. It's not easy. Sometimes it doesn't happen, but it is possible. So I like that distinction there, music, and I think it's good that you made it, especially in a series like this, where we're dealing with characters who have lots of moral grayness, right? Moving forward. So, yeah, so Dieter, he sent Dieter on a bus to go away. Now, whether or not he does or not, I don't know. He sent Dieter away back to the orphanage where Sweatpants Lady lived and worked, but Whether or not Tenma actually ended up taking there himself, I don't know. But we've wasted 10 minutes. But thank you all so much for the comments. And I really, really appreciated those. They were great to think about as we move into episode 13. So, with that being said, we're going to start episode 13 of Monster and just see what it gives us this wonderful morning, right? Start the day off right? So we're going to do that here in 3, 2, 1, and let's do this. Well... Took you 13 episodes, Monster, but you made me cry, so just 60-something to go, 61 episodes to go. God, this episode was so touching and emotional and everything. It may be my favorite episode so far. If I'm being honest, this may be one of my favorite episodes so far because it was just a tour de force of just connections and emotions and tying Schumann to Tenma and the parallels and the contrasting elements and everything leading up. And we finally have Tenma just coming out and saying it. He's going to kill Johann. That's why he has the gun. He's going to kill him. Like, he just comes out and says it finally, that that's his goal. He's not going to reason with Johann. He's not going to use it for self-defense. He's going to kill him. And then Schumann's like, you 8-year-old child, you need to go with this man that's on a mission to kill someone to keep him in line. I'm like, Schumann, I was with you up until this point. I mean, symbolically, and for an anime, I'm like, yes, I feel like this is the one element that makes this an anime more than like a real life show. Because in an anime, of course, this kid, go with Tenma. You're in constant danger because of it, but you can keep him in line. But like a realistic show would be like, no, kid, stay with me. Let him go have his suicide mission. But that's not Schumann's character. And I feel like Dieter, though, I say that. I feel like Dieter would eventually, he wouldn't stay in that village. Tenma is right. That would be the thing to do. He should stay in that village. It would be the perfect place for him, but this show isn't going to let us have these happy moments and a happy ending for these characters. I worry for Dieter, honestly, at this point. I worry for him because I don't think it's going to end well. No. And I think Tenma is kind of left with no choice because even though I'm sure he doesn't want Dieter to come with him, he hasn't this whole episode, he can't keep him in the village. Dieter will run away. And so the option is, do we let Dieter stay and risk the chance that this kid's going to run away eventually and end up worse off, or does he stick with Tenma? And that ties to Tenma's character, believing that he can keep him safe. There's a lot to unpack in this episode. A lot. And I didn't walk into this episode thinking it would go this way at all, and thinking we would have nearly the things to talk about that we do. But you know what? Welcome to Monster. Welcome to Monster. So I'm going to posit a lot of things on here. As always, if I say things that are wrong and you want to correct me, please spoiler tag. I don't want things confirmed or deconfirmed, and I don't want hints or clues of things to come. But we need to talk about this episode, Petra and Schumann. A love story for the ages. Oh my God. So I want to put Schumann on here. Because there are a lot of comparisons between him and Tenma, right? Between him and Tenma. And I'm going to put Heinz over here too, our policeman, because he's fairly important as well. And just talking about them. And of course, Huckleberry's like, throw my ball and I'll probably knock things over. But yeah, so this idea that Schumann has this very, very deep connection with Petra and his other patients that he doesn't want to admit, right? I think that there is a little bit of difference there between him and Tenma right off the bat, because Schumann said that he doesn't want to appear partial to his patients, right? He doesn't want to appear partial. And honestly, thinking back on it, if I think back on it, was Tenma ever partial to his patients? I don't feel like he was. I feel like he kind of treated them the same way that Schumann did. He was just like, oh yeah, sure. I feel that ties to the way that Tenma and Schumann, I'm going to put like 2 arrows here because it's kind of the same way with him and Tenma, but also he doesn't expect or take any reward. Like both Schumann and Tenma have this idea that being a doctor and saving lives and being there for your patients is enough. And that kind of establishes between both of them this sense of pride between the two of them. Schumann, right off the bat, that pride that he has makes him very off-putting, right? Because at first he's like yelling at the door for Petra to let him in, and he's kind of like grouchy and grumbly at her, and she yells back, and our first impression of Schumann is like, wow, this guy's a grumpy old doctor. Like, he's just, trying to get into people's houses to treat him, and he's just trying to give back against the patients what they give to him. And so it seems at first like him and Petra just don't like each other. But the reality is he loves her. And that's why he's so persistent. Because he loves her and wants to keep her safe. And God, that the love story between them is so beautiful in this one damn episode. I'm like, God. But then we have Finker the drunk was hit on the highway. And so we get established this idea that there is a care for the patient. And I'm going to put an understanding of their circumstance. Because I feel like just like with Tenma, Schumann was like, I'm not going to make Fink pay for it because he knows he's an alcoholic. He doesn't have the money, but he's going to treat him anyway because he cares, right? Like he's asking the guy on the motorcycle, yeah, he cares about him. This guy on the motorcycle is a literal messenger. If you ever have a play, there's a messenger character, and the messenger character is the bringer of exposition into the plot. And this guy does it throughout the episode. He brings the idea of Fink first and introduces that Tenma is there in the village. And then he also comes back at the end and bookends and is like, Tenma's running away. Like, he's a literal messenger. It's a classic trope character. And it's handled really well in this episode. But, so we get the idea that some random doctor, can't imagine who, comes and treats him. And I like that the nurse is like, I just did what I could. Like, she's just like, I just let him in to treat him. And Schumann's mad at first because he realizes he didn't just administer first aid, he treated the patient entirely. And there's a sense of pride there with Schumann, because Schumann's kind of like, well, I don't want this guy coming in thinking I'm not doing my job, because I am. He takes it so seriously. He takes his job very seriously, Schumann does. And he believes that he's doing the best that he can and is competent. And he's kind of, you can tell his pride is kind of wounded in that moment, because it seems like someone's come in and done something suggesting that he's not good enough and not doing his job to the standard he should, which is not the case. Tenma just has this type of mentality and heart that he can't just let someone suffer, right? And he wrote something on the chart. Which is curious. There's this interesting, I'm going to put this interesting duality with Tenma, and I'm going to put down here that he wants to save all he can. And he believes in reform with Hugo and with the terrorist. But it's the weirdest thing. He believes that he wants to save all he can. He believes in reform, but not for Johann. It's almost like he has accepted that Johann is evil and his responsibility. It's almost like Johann is his only regret, and he feels that even though he has this dedication of saving people, he feels like Johann is a lost cause. That there is no redemption for Johann. He's evil. He's only doing bad. He's not trying. Because here's the thing: the other characters that Tenma has interacted with have shown that they still value humanity and they're still trying to do right by what's them. Like the terrorist from a few episodes ago, he was admitting yeah, I'm doing bad, but I have a reason and I don't want to die. And I feel like Tenma believes that Johann doesn't care. He's apathetic. He's nihilistic. He doesn't believe in anything good. He just wants to cause evil and chaos. And to Tenma, that's an absolute that he feels it's his responsibility to eradicate, which is sadly completely against Tenma's character. But at the same time, it kind of goes along with it because Tenma's like, in order to save as many people as I can, Johan needs to go. He needs to be done because otherwise people are going to keep dying. And Johan is not regretting his actions whatsoever. He's just killing to be killing. So, or at least that's what we think so far. That's what we know. We don't know hardly anything about Johan whatsoever except the hearsay from everyone that's interacted with him. But yeah, so that's Tenma believes it's his responsibility. But it's definitely a departure. It's definitely the dark corner of Tenma's character because Tenma so far has shown a light on every person that he's met. He's shown a light and done well for everyone that he's encountered. But there is this dark seed in Tenma that's like, no, I have to get rid of him. But that begs the question, if he actually does, what are the ramifications of that? Because right now, he's wanted for murder. He's wanted as a suspect for murder on all these accounts. But there's so many ways that Tenma could probably prove his innocence. And the fact that he's not actually killed someone would be proof of that. But once he does kill someone, that's all kind of thrown out the window. And then people could peg those murders on him, being like, well, you killed this guy, so why is it weird to believe you would have not killed the others? And if he kills Johan, Johan's the one that actually killed those people. So if he kills the one that actually killed them, there's no one to pin the other murders on, so they'll all be pinned on Tenma. And it's like, and I feel like at that point, Tenma may not care. He may be like, I'm going to do all I can that's good up until the point I can kill Johan. And then after that, I'll accept my punishment. It's almost like, it feels like Tenma's like, I will accept my punishment once I kill Johan. If my sin is to be punished by me dying or being convicted for murdering all these people after killing Johan, it will be worth it to stop this evil. But I'm like, there's so much with that, Tenma. So, and now Dieter being involved, we'll get to that, but So yeah, Schumann feels a little bit offended that Tenma tried to pay for it, and he like goes off after him, and it's interesting because we as the audience at the beginning of this episode are led to believe that Schumann, the way that it comes across to us, the first impression we get, the book cover version of Schumann is that he's a proud man who's grumpy and ill-tempered and is going to cause problems for Tenma. And the polar opposite happens, right? So that's fascinating. Get past this OP. It felt longer. The OP felt longer for some reason, and I don't know how else to describe it. But yeah, so Tenma did not get rid of Dieter. He did not get rid of Dieter. He let Dieter come with him, right? And Dieter is very stubborn and not to be dissuaded. I'm going to put Dieter over here, our sweet boy. So he is still following Tenma, right? And Tenma acknowledges that it's a problem that he's following him. But at the end of the episode, he lets him come along. It's like, he knows that Dieter is a liability. Yes, he is. I am terrified for Dieter. I really, really am, because he is a liability. There's so much bad things that can happen by Dieter following him. I'm like, no. I feel like, you know what? It's interesting. We had back in episode 9, the little girl being taken from the nest by Hugo, and how it's a miracle, but it ends up working out that Hugo ends up raising her, and that it ends up working out for that reason. And here, it seems like we almost have a very similar situation of Tenma taking Dieter from the nest, so to speak. But here's the problem. Hugo and the little girl works out for several reasons. One, because they're not traveling from place to place like Tenma is, which is dangerous. They're in a stable location that doesn't change. And two, because even though Hugo himself is training others to shoot a gun and possibly be violent, Hugo himself is no longer in battle. He's no longer in war, essentially. So he's not at war with anyone. So he has a stable home life and can actually keep her there and somewhat provide shelter and food and stability. Tenma is at war with Johann, and he's drugged this little kid along with him. That is extremely dangerous, and I am terrified that Dieter is going to get caught in the crossfire. Would I think Johann would shoot a little kid? Absolutely. I think he would if he's as evil as Tenma thinks he is. Yeah, I think Johann would have no qualms with killing a little kid, and that's why I'm terrified, because I'm afraid that Dieter's going to get in the middle of Tenma and Johann, and he's going to die, and I'm like, I'm not ready for that show. I'm not ready for child death show. Not ready for it. No, please. So, just not, can't take it, right? Can't take it. It's a problem if you follow me, he tells him. And Dieter just seems unconcerned. I'm just like, this is going to go horribly. Nope. He's like, I can't stay in one place, and you can't go to school, and you can't make any friends. And Dieter says, I do have a friend. And he says, it's Tenma. Show, why are you doing this? Why are you making me have awful, ominous regrets, right? Watching this show. But Dieter says to his friend, I don't regret watching this show, for the record. I just have a feeling it's going to rip my heart out and curb stomp it, and I'm going to feel really bad. But he says his friend is Tenma. And Tenma knows that now. So, but yeah, he's such a liability. Such a liability. And it makes him stand out even more because, I mean, Tenma is in Germany. He's an Asian man in Germany, so he already kind of stands out. But it would be very easy to track an Asian man with a redheaded boy with him. That's a pretty specific description that's pretty easy to figure out. So it's just, I mean, Schumann walks into the restaurant and instantly knows that it's him. But he comes, and I like that Dieter kind of comes up and says, oh, he's like, was it you? You're the one who came to my clinic and did unnecessary things. And Tim was like, oh. And he's like, don't underestimate me. He's like, I know Fink's a broke alcoholic. And I wasn't going to charge him. So yeah, he feels insulted by Tenma's act of kindness because he thinks it's not necessary. He's like, don't step on my pride and underestimate me. He's like, I'm not that type of person. And he assumes that Tenma is from this fancy hoity-toity elite hospital, which he is. But then he changes his mind, doesn't think so, because why would an elite hospital? Because Tenma doesn't fit the elitist, trope that Schumann is probably expecting, right? But then we get introduced to Heinz. Heinz is our police officer, and it's such an interesting story. It's like you could just see this happening in real life, like the son of the policeman, the cop's son, whose mom is like the doctor has a crush on, right? So Schumann, he has a crush and love for Petra, who I'm assuming her husband has passed for a while. We don't get any mention of him whatsoever, but he has this crush and love for Petra, and he is aggravated, put aggravated at Heinz for his neglect. He thinks that Heinz has neglected his mom. And the thing about it is, Heinz is an interesting character too, because he turns out to be a pretty decent guy. Here's the thing about Heinz. He neglected his mom because of fear of her dying. I mean, we don't know anything about his dad. We can assume his dad has passed, right? They don't make mention that he left. They don't mention him at all. So it could be assumed that he passed. But it's so natural for a person, when you're afraid of someone passing, it's easy to distance yourself from them. And that sounds weird because you would think, oh, if somebody's going to pass, I want to be around them all the time. But it's one of those kind of like out of sight, out of mind sort of situations where Heinz's neglect for his mom isn't because he doesn't love her. No, he rushes there immediately when he finds out she's in the hospital. It's not that, but he's afraid of losing her. And so it's sort of a knee-jerk, you have fight or flight syndrome where, usually if you find out someone you love is suffering, one reaction is you get instantly closer to them and you don't want to leave their side at all. And the other side of that coin is that you can't deal with the fact of losing them, so you distance yourself from them so that you don't feel that trauma and you don't feel that emotion, right? And it seems like Heinz, he wants to do the other side of the coin where he's like, I can't take it. I can't take the idea of losing my mom, so I'm going to distance myself so I don't have to think about it. And whether that's right or wrong, I mean, unless you're in that scenario, it's hard to pass judgment on someone for doing that. But Heinz appears at the beginning of the episode like he doesn't care about his mom. And he's like, oh, she's a tough old bird. She's got this. But the reality is he does care about her. He just doesn't know what to do, so he distances himself and says, oh, she'll be fine. You know, you kind of, with your parents and grandparents, you disillusion yourself to being like, oh, they're invincible. And when it's apparent that that's not the case, then there's a lot of fear there, right? And that's how Heinz is dealing with that fear. Whereas Schumann is doing the opposite. He's trying to attack that fear head on. These two both love Petra, but they're handling that love from totally different angles. Schumann's like, I got to get closer to her, as close as I can, to latch on and protect her. And Heinz is like, I have to distance myself. And if I don't think about it, she's going to be fine. That's kind of the scenario between the two of them. And it's so fascinating to see in this one episode those two different ideologies being put to play. And Heinz, he knows Dr. Schumann. He knows about him. He's a little bit like, at the very end of the episode, he's like, what, you're proposing to my mom? What? And Schumann's like, no. But it's clear he's going to by the end of the episode. It's like, yeah. And then he defends Tenma because he sees that Tenma's really uncomfortable around the cop and knows that, you know, and the thing about Schumann is Schumann doesn't pry, right? He does not pry, but offers help, which is the same vice versa. It's something that both Tenma and Schumann do. They don't pry into other people's business necessarily, but they do offer help. And he gives an alibi there. And I like that Heinz is like, my mom's too stubborn, she won't listen to anybody. And Schumann's like, don't act as if it's not your problem. And Heinz tries to like defend the situation, and Schumann gets mad about it. And he's like, I don't think she has any regrets for raising me. And Schumann's like, he gets so mad. He's like, you young whippersnapper, you should care for your mom. And it's like he's like, her life has just begun. He's like, don't write your mom off. Schumann gets mad because he's like, don't write your mom off like she's, you know, old and doesn't have any life yet. He's like, she's just middle-aged. She has lots of life yet left. Life left with me, you know, what could be. So, yeah, Tenma offers to like repay him for helping getting him out of the situation. And he's like, well, then fine, come with me. Like, fine, come help me. And he admits that he's gone through like the same thing Tenma's gone through. But he takes him there to see all the patients, and Tenma can see that they all love him because they all offer him all the different things like the cider and the food and the potatoes. And he's like, no, he's like, once you're healed, I'll drink with you all night. And Tenma's like, I can relate. He's like, I know exactly how you are with your patients because that's how I have been with them. It's like, and he's like, and they just go from house to house. And of course, they leave the last house that's, you know, the most difficult for last. And Schumann says, my specialty is internal medicine. And I can do what I can outside my specialty, but things don't go very well when I'm by myself. So he's basically acknowledging that the stuff I deal with here is not my forte. It's not my specialty, but I can do what I can to help the people here in the town. But when I'm alone, it doesn't work out. And I think that's really important to note. The idea that we can only do so much alone. And I think that's why he tries to convince Dieter to go with Tenma at the end. He's like, Tenma does not need to be alone. It's kind of like a Doctor Who scenario. There's a thing that the Doctor Who kind of reminds me of Tenma a little bit in that they're very idealistic, optimistic characters that, I mean, Doctor Who is a doctor, but not just like treating them physically. It's more like a spiritual, you know, sort of doctor. But there is a concept in Doctor Who where several characters like, you don't need to be alone because you being alone can be a dangerous thing. And I think by the end of this episode, Schumann has related enough to Tenma to know this. And so he's like, Dieter, I can't go with him, but you need to for now, which is still, I'm still like, I get why the doctor made him go, but I'm like, it's not going to end well. Not at all. I mean, he says things don't go well when I'm by myself. And Tim was like, well, this place is wonderful. He's like, yeah, there's nothing here, but it's a peaceful village. And he says, no, I didn't mean that. It says, you're loved by the people here. And you really love them too. Like that's, and of course Schumann's like, love, I lost feelings like that a long time ago. I'm being tsundere. I don't know what you're talking about. I love the concept of an old tsundere, right? Because usually when we think of tsunderes, we think of like the young, impetual teenage kid that doesn't want to admit his feelings. But I like in this show, the tsundere is this old man that doesn't want to admit his feelings, but they're clearly there. I'm like, okay. But there's this concept of love and being loved, right? And I wonder if Tenma feels like he's lacking in part of that. If since he's had to be on the run and go from place to place, I feel like he may love the people he interacts with, but maybe he doesn't feel, or maybe part of this isn't being reciprocated or isn't being fulfilled. And he kind of envies Schumann in that moment for having that here in this village. Want to make note, there was the offer to stay. There was the offer to stay, and Tenma chose no. There's a part of me that is so frustrated with Tenma by the end of this that he believes he has to go do this. And there's a part of me that's so frustrated because, yeah, Schumann establishes at the end, he's like, we could probably protect you. You could live your life here like a witness protection thing, where you could live here as Dr. Chan. No one would ever know. Now, I think Tenma is thinking that at the end of it all, though, Lunge would find out. Lunge would find a way around and figure out that he's not Chan, he's Tenma. And then I feel like Tenma's thinking that would put the whole village in danger because this is a peaceful place. He's like, I don't want to drag my presence and my burden and my problems into your peaceful village and wreck stuff here. I don't want to do that. But it's so frustrating because you see why Tenma doesn't want to stay, and you get the point and you kind of agree with him. But then you have the other side of it where it's like, you could maybe be peaceful there, but that's just not how it works, right? It's just not, that's not how this goes. It's like, ugh. And so then, of course, he says, I'm just doing my job. Schumann's like, we got one more house, and it's a difficult one. And so we have this farm woman here that he can't get to go to the clinic, Petra, and says that I just want her to go home. That she just wants to go home. I just want her to go to a doctor. And he gets like on there and yells at her. And he kind of slips up though. He's like, I'm going to get you out. I'm not going to lose my reason for living. And Tim was like, oh, your reason for living. That was a slip. You like her, don't you? And he turns around and he's blushing. What a tsundere. He lets it loose. He admits it. He's like, I mean, I just wouldn't have anyone to fight with anymore. It's like, no, you love her. And then Tim was like, oh, I wouldn't be able to eat her goulash anymore. And Tim was like, aha. And Dieter's like, your face is red, mister. He's like, you brat, shut up. And Tenma gets it. He's like, He's like, this man is in love with her, and that's why he cares so much about her well-being. But this part here, where Tenma addresses her and she said, he's like, why do you hate doctors? Why don't you? And of course, Schumann's like, don't listen to her. And Tenma wants to know, and she says, well, because they fiddle around with people's bodies thinking that they're gods or something. And Tenma, very Doctor Who-like, is like, sometimes I think it would be great if we were. He's like, but we're not. We're human and we make mistakes. And he's like, we try our best, but he's like, I wish I could heal people perfectly like God. So there is something to that, because I feel like with Johann, Tenma wishes he could get Johann to reform. And maybe that's still on the table. Maybe just in the moment to get Schumann to back off, he was like, no, I gotta go kill him. Bye. Maybe that was just a way they had to get up. Maybe Tenma, I feel like even though Tenma says he's like, I'm going to go kill Johan, I still feel like when he gets down to it, when he finally sees him again, he's not going to whip the gun out and just shoot. I could be wrong. Probably will be. But I feel like in that moment, Tenma's going to have a moment where he's going to think, he's like, can't we talk this out? Can't you reform yourself? And that's his wish. His wish is to be like God and reform him. And I don't think that that's possible, but that's going to be the big question. Is Tenma going to just shoot, or is he going to try to do something first? But that's his big regret right now. He's like, I wish I could heal people perfectly. And I love the use of silence in this episode, that when we don't hear her response, you can tell as the audience that she's thinking about what he's saying. I love that. I love that that's just a nice little way of narratively doing it. And he says, I'm always trembling whenever I see my patients. He's like, I'm always scared around them. This part here, though, when he goes inside, sees the goulash, and sees her, and she's oblivious, too. He's like, oh, well, Dr. Schumann likes your goulash. She's like, oh, that's news to me. He eats it without a word when I make it. It's like, girl, you are just so you two are oblivious. He loves you. Can't you realize that? But then she says that her shoulders are stiff, and she can't lower her head to her chin, like her chin to her chest. And he figures out she can't move it, so there's a hemorrhage there. That terrifies me, the idea of an aneurysm. I'm like, that's terrifying. So he says it's a subarachnoid hemorrhage. And then Schumann knows exactly what that is, and he's scared about it, and that's when she collapses. And they decide that they've got to operate on her. They can't waste time, and they can't risk it, right? They've got to do it right then and there. So, of course, back at the police station, they're making copies of the murder suspect, and there is the one of Tenma right there, and they see him. He's 37, and they're just like, oh my God. They know to look for him. And then we cut back to Schumann. He's like, it'll be my fault again for losing another person that I love. And again, that foreshadowing that we don't get explained until the end of the episode, that Schumann loves someone and he lost him, and now he doesn't want to lose Petra again. And Tenma's like, okay, that's all the reasoning I need to try to save her. And Tenma's like, okay, that's what we're going to do. And then we cut to Heinz, who is like, I can get a promotion if things go well, who thinks that catching Tenma will lead to his promotion. And so he's all excited to go and find Tenma, but that's when the nurse calls about his mom. And he obviously is instantly worried about her. And he says collapsed again. So he knows about her first collapse. So that's important too, that Heinz, he knows and cares about his mom's health. That he's been keeping track of it. He's just, again, he's a tsundere like Tenma. He's putting on a front just like him. Like Schumann. Schumann and Heinz are more alike than they seem, right? They handle fear of loss very differently. He's like, if only I'd forced to get her check up at a hospital after her first stroke. So she's had a stroke before. And again, Tenma's the only one they can count on. He's the brilliant surgeon. This whole surgery scene is amazing. Where he's like, I don't know what happened in the past, but we have to try our best for the patient before us. That's all we can do as doctors. And Schumann's like, yeah, I know. Ali Dieter's just sitting there playing with the soccer ball like, oh, hey, they're having this surgery. Don't worry, Tenma's there. And that's the last thing that Hyman wanted to hear. And them going into there, the whole gun scene with the operating room that is so well done and masterful. The whole idea that Tenma never looks up. Tenma is in the zone when he's in surgery, and he can't focus on anything else. And the idea that Tenma operates without hesitation. There's a part of me that believes that Tenma thinks he could die in this moment, but there's a part of me that thinks that Tenma wouldn't have cared if he had died in that moment because he would have been saving a patient, and that he's doing all he can to help her despite the situation. So I feel like Tenma, when he's in the operating room, he goes into this zone and just does not care what happens outside regardless. He's only focused on the patient, right? It's just that hyper focus, right? And Hugo talked about that episodes ago with his hyper fixation when he's studying something. And I thought for a second I didn't know what was going to happen. I was like, I don't think obviously Tim was going to get shot. I thought Schumann might have got shot in that moment. I was like, that would have just escalated the chaos of the situation. But God. And the crazy thing about it is that in this scenario, Heinz looks like a threat to Tenma, and that kind of puts the mom maybe in the same category. So there's this thing crossing my mind of like Tenma saving another person that might cause bad down the road, but he does it anyway because he's a doctor and that's his job. It's like, ugh. And I do think the moment that Schumann lets his emotions get the better of him and like talked about don't bring meningitis and germs in here, but grabbed the son by the tie, I was like, yeah, you kind of just got like, let that get ahead of you. I'm assuming that he changed his gloves after that. Oh my God. I do want to get a photo of him with the gloves on at some point. That might end up being the thumbnail. I don't know. But man, and then that shot where it's just them having this, back and forth, and there's Tenma in the foreground still operating despite that. And Schumann's like, if you love your mother, you're going to let this man save her. Like, don't be an asshole. Don't be an idiot. And them just both coming to the realization that they love their mother and want the best. They love Petra and want the best for her. And Tenma, regardless of the situation or his past, is the one that can save her in this moment. It's such a good scene. Oh my God. And then, yeah, we cut to the afterwards after he kicks Heinz out. And Dieter says, see, Tenma's here. So it's all right. I feel like that's such a foreboding line where Dieter, he says, Tenma is here. So it's okay. Hearts and sunshines and rainbows, right? Sunshines and rainbows. It's all good. I feel like that's such a haunting, foreboding thing because Dieter believes that Tenma is the source of good and that things will be okay as long as he's there. But by the end of the episode, we have Tenma saying, I'm going to go kill someone. And it's like, well, So, God. And then Heinz is just like, what do I do? I'm going to make sure my mom makes it through. And then we cut back and everything seems to be stable. And so the Pioneer, she, the nurse is told to get some rest. And obviously there's like a symbolic callback to Petra looking like Johann post-surgery because the head has been shaved and there's the bandages and everything. Like there is a tie there. And I like that Heinz has been in the room the entire time with Tenma and Schumann, like watching them all. And Tenma says he wants to watch her so that you can propose to Miss Petra when she gets better. And Schumann's like, don't be saying that out loud in front of Heinz, in front of her kid. Heinz like, what do you mean propose to her? I can't sleep until I take him away. What do you mean propose to my mom? And Schumann's like, of course I'm not going to. Don't be foolish. And I love that little pause where he's like, don't be foolish. Like, no. But he says the line, I'm not someone who can propose to anyone. And then we cut to Heinz. Like, oh, it's not that he doesn't want to. He doesn't think that he can. And this whole backstory just got me. He says, when I was at the university hospital, I never cared about talking to my patients. I only thought I could raise my position in the hospital. And I got into the director's faction and wrote papers for him. His backstory is the same as Tenma's, right? That he has the same background as Tenma. And he followed through and married the daughter. Now, obviously, the circumstances, we don't know. It doesn't seem like it from the flashback that his wife was the same as Eva, but he followed through the same thing that Tenma had kind of laid out for himself, and Tenma realizes how similar they are. He's like, I pushed forward along the path of success, and I never paid attention to my wife. Which, I do think Tenma would have been different in that regard. I think Tenma would have cared about his wife, but would have still forged along that path of success. If I was a real doctor, I would have noticed when I'd seen her face. And that's when Tenma realizes, I'm going to get a picture of that. That's when Tenma realizes that he is a little bit different. His wife had symptoms of liver failure and he never noticed it until she was dead. And God, that last line where she was like, you finally noticed me. And it's like, oh my God, like that being her final like breath, you finally paid attention to me. Oh my God. And he clearly loved her because, and was sad that she died because he had all these regrets. And so since then, he says he has no right to love anyone. He has no right to love. Even though he's so close now with Petra, or trying to be close. It's like he learned his lesson and now he's trying to make up for it by being especially close with her, right? So and it's so curious because there's so many similarities between him and Tenma, but then there are so many differences too. Like him saying he has no right to love anyone. There is a part of me that wonders if Tenma thinks the same, if Tenma believes that he has no right to love anyone either because of the mistake he's made with Johan or not. I don't know. I think he was in love with Eva at the time, but he didn't maybe love her, especially not after she left him. And he doesn't feel like he has any right to give her a second chance. So it's interesting to see the parallels and contrast between the two of them. But it's so interesting, right? Because we've had Moore that's had connections with Tenma, and we've had Becker that's kind of had connections with Tenma, and now we have Schumann. So it's fascinating. And Tenma says that's not true. You've been paying attention. You've been paying attention to the people of this town, and you do care. And Petra was saved because you were paying attention. And so, yeah, it's like you do deserve love because you've been giving it all this time. Oh, and the sunlight breaking over the wheat fields being so symbolic, of course, right? And so then Heinemann, he has this option where he can either turn Tenma in while he's asleep or not, and he chooses not to. He had every opportunity, but he chose to let Tenma go. He made that choice because he saved his mom's life. And regardless of whether he thinks he could be a murderer or not, I don't think Schumann believes that he could be, but who knows? And then Tenma goes along his way. Like they had a doctor come in to check on her, and they fly back through helicopter, and the messenger bike man comes and tells him that Tenma's walking away with Dieter. And yeah, so Schumann, I was like, Schumann, don't have a heart attack running after him, right? But he runs after him and is like, Dieter, he's like, you could stay here. Like, come on, Tenma, you guys could stay here and work with me. Like, we could have a life together here, right? And Tenma says, this village might be good for Dieter. It might be good for him. He could stay here and be fine. And Dieter, that look on his face, Dieter does not want to leave Tenma. He's like, no. And you can't blame Dieter. He's a little kid, and he's had this, issues of abandonment and abuse. Tenma's the first positive, kind presence in his life. Why would he want to leave him, right? You can't blame him. Like, Dieter is probably afraid of going back to a scenario like he's been in before. And Schumann's like, this village can protect you from the police. And I just love how distraught Dieter looks. He's just like, come on, Tenma, don't leave. Like, don't leave me here. And Tenma just is like, no, I can't do that. He's like, you could take care of the people here. The village needs you. And it's like, Tenma's experienced that with his hospital, and he walked away. He's like, I have to go. He's like, why? And he asks him to take care of Dieter. And Dieter's like, no, he doesn't want to stay. He's like, if you can stay here, you can save lives of countless people in this area. We could do this together. And that's when he says it. He's like, save countless lives. I have to kill a man. That line, God, the weighing, right? The weighing where, yeah, to save countless lives. On the surface, it seems like he's choosing killing one man over saving countless lives. But the reality is, in his mind, he needs to save countless lives by killing one man. Or you could argue he's choosing one man over saving countless lives, or it could be both. But it's just, he believes, he's like, countless people have died because of Johann so far. If I do nothing and I stay here, yeah, I'd be saving countless lives, but I also know that he would keep killing. And he's like, and my heart can't let that happen when I know that it's my fault that he's able to do this and I need to take responsibility for it. And it's like, and the police aren't doing anything about it. It's like, because he knows that Johann is in with the police. It's a bad scenario all the way around. And Schumann's like, what are you talking about? Killing someone? And I love Schumann's like, well, wait, Tima, no. He's like, what do you mean? There's no way you can do such a thing. Like the doctor's so convinced that Tima's such a pure character, there's no way he can kill someone. Right? You try so desperately to save people's lives. And that's the thing. He does try desperately to save people's lives. And that's why he feels he has to kill Johann to save possible victims he's going to have. And then Dieter says, Tima's going no matter what you say. That he's already decided and he's not going to waver. And Schumann's like, well, damn it. And that's when he looks at Dieter and makes the decision to tell him to go after him. He's like, Tima won't lose his way if you're with him. Yeah, so Dieter has this horrific responsibility of keeping Tima human. I feel like that's a double-edged sword. It's either, yes, keeping Dieter with Tima is going to keep Tima from doing something rash because he's going to have to protect Dieter at the same time. But on the other hand, if he loses Dieter, that's like going to be a chunk of his human soul that I think is just going to be completely removed. And I'm not ready for that. I don't want to experience that. I know why Schumann sent Dieter with him, but it makes me feel so ominous and the biggest sense of foreboding and dread. I'm like, no, I don't like it at all. And that's just what he does. And Tima doesn't argue. He says, watch Tima carefully. And Dieter has this resolve. He's like, yes, I will go do that. I've got a job to do. And Tima just accepts that he's with him. And that's the episode. Oh, y'all. I didn't expect walking into this episode that it would be filled with so much to talk about and that it would have so much thematic things and emotions and I would get like so gut-wrenching, like, I did not see it coming, honestly. And it's been the biggest surprise of the week, this reaction, because I didn't walk into this thinking I would get emotional and start crying, but this episode's one of my favorites so far, but it has given us such a ominous emotion going forward, and I have a feeling that it's only going to get worse. So, yay. So I hope you enjoyed this reaction and discussion. I'm very curious to hear your thoughts about this particular episode. If there's anything that bears witness to things that will happen later on in the series, please spoiler tag them so I'm not spoiled. But I hope to hear from y'all. I'm excited to hear your thoughts, but I hope y'all have a wonderful week. Please stay safe, take care, and yeah, I'll be back very soon with episode 14 of Monster.